Hey guys, so I was working here on a project, an interesting one. Actually, I was working on a course about Claude Code on Udemy. If you don't know what Claude Code is, maybe this video will be a little complicated for you. If you already have some experience, then I think you'll find it quite useful actually. So while working on this course, I researched different best practices of working with Claude, understood how people are using that effectively and in a way that allows seriously effective usage of the autonomous version of Claude Code. So the system that is capable of actually implementing whole projects without you even controlling it. And this is one of the ways to enable that. And I want to show you what it allows me to do and how that works. So here's the structure of the project. Let me make it larger a little bit to show you the structure first. We're gonna have my cursor on the left and my terminal on the right, and we're gonna, work with this code a little bit to understand what's going on. In a nutshell, this is a project that allows to create a Docker instance with certain settings, and within this Docker instance, configure Claude Code through properly defined Claude MD and other files that I will share with you. Basically, most of the attention in this project is targeted towards actually making Claude intelligent for a particular kind of project to implement it. A lot more intelligent than it would be otherwise, not only from the knowledge perspective, but also from the development process perspective. Because really what's happening here is we're not coming up with the new ways to organize processes for agents, similar way as we looked for organization of the processes for people when we developed agile methodologies for software development. It seriously is basically the same feeling right now. But anyway, let's go to practical stuff. So how it works is following. There's three folders: Claude config, Postgres data, and working directory. So the idea is that the working directory is sym-linked into the app directory within the Docker container that is isolated from everything. And basically all the files that we see there, considering that we launch Claude once we log into this container, we launch the Claude right away. And so in this working directory, we need to have a certain structure, default structure that will immediately bring Claude Code to life and get it to understand what we're trying to do and where it needs to act. And actually it doesn't matter at which stage of the project. So it can keep developing in this fashion for quite a while, I think. Anyway, so what we have here is we have Claude MD file that I will go through in details in just a minute because I think it deserves attention. Then we have some MCP configuration, and over here I just added for this particular project that is kind of set up here. So I added here MCP server configurations for Postgres and for context 7, because again, this is within the context of the project and I actually need to replace those, but I'll do that a bit later. Then what I have here is a migrations folder. That's for the database migrations that we're going to have. Then we have memory folder. That is the folder where I store a whole bunch of documents that will be necessary for the agent to start working and to actually do the work and keep doing that going forward without going crazy and remembering what's going on. So Luminous project is something we work on with a friend of mine, and there's a specification for this project. It's like a coaching platform. And basically this file describes the architecture, and I sat and worked on this architecture for a little while to understand what I want from that and how I want it to work. At the end of the day, this ended up being application with React SPA on the front end, and then a fast API backend with Python, and then we have the underlying layer of various services and also Postgres that is running locally within the same Docker image. Look, I know it's not good to do it this way, but I decided to do it this way this time for simplicity purposes. If you want, you can in 3 seconds in Cursor change it to, having your own architecture and infrastructure. Anyway, so architecturally we agreed. Design requirements, same stuff, but talking about the design of the application, a web design. Then there is such a thing as project index describing the kind of hierarchy within the project, and it's a custom JSON, but it is added to the context and allows it to understand better how the project is structured. It's like giving it like a hierarchical representation of a project within the mind of LLM. Then we have README is just README, don't pay attention to that. Then we had requirements for the MVP. There's a bunch of pages, a bunch of components. We're not going to go into details. And then we have the roadmap for this thing. Now, the trick is that in my Claude MD that we started with, this is where this matters. Because over here, we describe all of these files to Claude and when and how they should be used. And we have our particular, details about what files to use where, what technology stack to use, how to track changes, how to track the roadmap and use roadmap as your own to-do list, how to use Postgres through the MCP that we connect to this project. And yeah, in general, how to operate within this environment. You see, it gives you like the whole structure of the files, it gives you common commands and all the infrastructural details. So it's already kind of pre-planned. So as you know, Claude Code reads Claude MD immediately at start. So that's just like a universal system prompt. And then the rest of the details in the memory are customizable and can be customized to any kind of project. Now, these three folders are sym-linked into Docker image. And well, that basically means that they're mounted there to the folders over here. So all the changes that we have will be saved in our local folder. Now, working directory wise, well, that basically linked to the working directory. Postgres data is linked to where the Postgres database is storing its databases. And Claude config is linked to the configuration locations of Claude, so that when we start in Docker, we could actually launch Claude, authenticate, save our credentials, and those credentials and all the settings and all the histories of the Claude configuration on this particular instance will be saved into this folder. So what it means is that this is basically like three control surfaces into what's going on the image that is building this application. So now what we want to do is, well, actually a couple of things. I need to drop the old file here. And I need to update MCP JSON with, I was building Twitter clone for the course. So it's going to be luminous. And of course, we're going to remove these passwords later. I hope I will have enough in my head to actually do that and not forget about that. That would be great. And good. And I think now we are ready to give this stuff to Cursor specifically. And run it. But before I do that, I need to ask it to shut down the current instance of this image that I'm running for a different project. I'm using Whisperflow for the dictation, so I'm going to be talking to Whisperflow to make this change. So what I want you to do is to understand this project and based on the learnings, create and deploy a Docker image, build and deploy the Docker image, and then validate that it is up and working. Now, you also need to change the run container script and the Docker file and setup sh. You don't need to change them, but you might want to change them based on the updated requirements of the project and the Claude MD. I'm also going to give it these couple of scripts so it was aware. And I'm going to give it Claude MD and let's do architecture over here. I want you to make sure that the actual scripts are aligned with the architecture and the requirements of this project. It's okay that I didn't attach the requirements themselves because we're only basically interested in the setup. So I think it would be more useful to stay here. You probably noticed that I don't use terminal in the bottom of the screen, and instead I'm using a separate terminal app. Over here, I just placed them together on Mac. And there's a reason for that. It's just a little bit too much of collaboration between Cursor and Claude Code is frustrating me, because I want to keep working in Cursor seamlessly while Claude Code is running, but they often start changing files and blocking views and switching views or something like that. So anyway, I prefer to have it in a separate terminal, at least so far. Now, let's see what's happening here. So it updated VM, I see that, Python 3. It kept the PEEP installation, so that's good. Yeah, sorry for this mess, but it is what it is with this setup of the screens. Okay, those changes actually make a lot of sense at a glance, at least. I forgot to tell it to shut down. My camera is not allowing me to see the full screen, not exactly convenient. Before you go forward, can you please make sure that you shut down the old images running there so that we can safely deploy this new one? Okay, so yeah, I will probably speed up this portion a little bit. Yeah, I think it needs to update the port configuration in project requirements and Claude MD later, because I think we're gonna have to mess with these port numbers, and that's not going to be fun, I think. Let's do it this way so far, so we don't use terminal. Cheers. In the meantime, I got some Coke. Okay, so it says that it's basically done. I know that we will need to expect problems, especially problems with ports. I want to first run it and see how that works. And then I'm sure we'll run into a few issues there. But also, at the end of the day, this is a templatizing kind of process. So we created this template of the working directory for Claude, and then after that, Claude is picking up the pace and working on that rather than Cursor. So I'm gonna ask it to make sure to run the image, and we will connect to that. Well, actually, I think it should be just enough to run the run container script. So we go to the folder of the working directory, which is over here. Actually, let's go a little bit up, and over here in the main project folder, what we do is we run container script. And as we can see, what's happening here is that it's actually running the deployment and putting the Docker there, and then starting the PostgreSQL scripts to create tables and databases if necessary. Unfortunately, I don't see behind my camera, so I'm going to put it over here, if that's okay with you, and hopefully that's going to be better. So it created databases. And I think over here we're running into the error of running and connecting to a container. So I'm going to create a new chat over here just for the fresh context, and I'm going to give it readme docker run container script, and I'm going to give it the error from the terminal. Just a little bit of context over here. This is the log output when I try to execute run container.sh script. Understand what's happening and what's going wrong there, if anything, and let's fix that. Of course, I'm going to rely on Opus in this case, but maybe actually it's not necessarily better. Okay. Actually didn't know about this type of issues, but sounds believable. We'll see. I can already hear and feel as a good, strong classical engineers are hating me for treating the code like that and trusting LLM so much. But that's the approach I took, and I'm trying to find ways to make this AI agent usage and vibe coding together work in a new kind of fashion. Not the same way as we did before. So if, me or somebody else who is doing that are going to be able to achieve big, powerful projects with this amount of resources that we're committing to that, with AI actually helping us to the maximum, then yeah, it will be proof that, new approaches and other approaches work. All right. Let's give it a try again. I kind of finished fixing that. And it successfully logged me into the instance, into the Docker itself. So when I run this run container, it actually runs the container, spins up the database, and connects me there. Yeah, so I had a bit of a situation when I paused the recording and went ahead with the implementation and then realized that I'm on a phase 3 and the recording is paused. So I came back and now I'm just cleaning up the logs and the change log and the rest of that. And I also want to do the same here. This will be new project. Here requires. So I also wanted to change the project index and remove unnecessary stuff. So basically what happened is I have built successfully 3 phases and now have to redo it from scratch just to, make sure I show you how that works. I also want to make sure that I fix one thing, because when the Claude was working on those phases, it realized that actually there is no PEEP3 and UVcorn installed. So I just want to make sure that we're doing that. All right, so we updated the project index. I think that, okay, roadmap. Oh, actually, yeah, I'm gonna do the roadmap old-fashioned way. Haven't done that for a long time. It's over here. Oh, how about that? Place all. Good. All right, now I'm gonna make a new chat over here. And also just for the context, I'm gonna give it a README file. So it says it kinda, B3 install orchestration request for step. Okay. All right, it's updating me container version. Funny guy. Okay. And of course, debug outputs. I do feel like these guys, the longer the context you give it, the more talkative it becomes. It's just so frustrating. The more stuff it wants to throw at you. That's okay. We are close. I basically already know that all 3 phases worked, but I do need to show you how and maybe finish up this project just to see where we can get. So we're done here and I'm coming back to this terminal and we are going run container. All right, it starts the Postgres and we are in the container. And while I'm here, I'm saying Claude and we are going forward. Again, I'm gonna log in and come back to you. Already, I logged in and yep, security notice. Yes, you can edit and we are in the folder. So as you can see, we're in Claude Code and running Sonnet 4.5. I actually want to change it to Opus for the first phase of implementation because I find it very important. But just for the speed purposes, well, actually, let's do it. I mean, let's do it the right way. And really, all I need to say now is kind of go ahead. So go and implement phase 1. And my hands are off the keyboard. What I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be clicking through and approving and allowing it to do that without approval later on basically all the actions, because that's exactly the point of this setup. When I containerize the entire application and the database and the agent working on it, I get this pretty interesting opportunities I can use. I was even thinking of adding an interface to the agent itself, to Claude, and also exposing that on the web. But to be honest, for me, it's much more convenient to just work with that through the terminal. But I guess for many people that would be convenient to do that in the same way as, say, V0 or Lovable does. And it seems like they have, like, in essence, the same approach. But the trick with this thing is that now anybody can have this same approach. And, just connect Claude Code as, well, sort of a backend agent system, and the rest depends on you. This is the layer where you define what agent does and how it behaves and what are the limits of what it can do, etc. And it gives you like a complete freedom, because this agent can search the web, this agent can do pretty much anything. Parallel project, I worked on another experiment where what I did is I packaged up Claude into a Docker container itself and exposed it through API, MCP, and even SSH. And there's plenty of way to do that, as far as I understand at the moment. But the idea for me was that, okay, now I have this independent Claude running somewhere independently, and my cursor or my other Claude or my something else can use it in order to, operate with that. Okay, it went to create vector index. Something went wrong, but that happens. We'll just give it some time to complete it. So yeah, as you can see, it now creates tables and alters tables and executes all sorts of these operations. Well, at the moment it is creating a file with the script, and now executes, and now it sets up the indexes. So all of this work is being done, and at the same time, as you can see, Claude config with all the history and credentials and the rest is saved in this folder, and Postgres database is here, and our working directory is going to be updated with this initial migrations, as you can see. So it's basically a setup script, and then we're close to actually finalizing this first phase. I wanted to take a look at what it did. It just updated the changelog, and all the changes that it made, it had put in this changelog file. And the changelog file is separated by different sections for navigation, so it kind of makes sense for it to look into this changelog and understand what is happening where. I'm only concerned that this changelog can go big as the project grows, and we would need to reorganize this changelog in order to be just the sequential log of changes. And, on the top, we would have the most recent ones, or, the most recent / the most important, something along those lines. Or maybe we will just make logs later and have it read the logs. So you know what it feels like? It feels like they're kind of fusing the agent that controls this project and the project itself. They're fused together, and this can be, it seems like it will be the future where, the application that agent runs is a sort of, maybe it's a sort of a way for agent to interface with the world. Maybe something else, I don't know. But those are just random thoughts while my Claude is actively thinking. Anyway, seems like it's not moving. I'm just gonna tell it to go on. I haven't seen that, to be honest, for a while. Maybe I accidentally pushed escape or something. Nah, some sort of glitch. Interestingly, this is one of the favorite setups for me recently is this Postgres with pgvector, and the pgvector for the vector storage, just to keep all the stuff in one place and not bother with that too much. Like Postgres is basically a standard. Okay, cool. So the phase 1 is complete, and it updated all of the different files over here, the change logs and the roadmap. We can just double check that. See, in the roadmap, it marked, okay, I've done this stuff. In the change log, it added the changes that had been made and when they have been made. So all good. Now we're ready for the phase 2. But before I do that, I need to clear, because I want to start with a fresh context because of the context root. Because the more you give it, the more confused it becomes, and becomes much more difficult to manage and much more prone to mistakes. I talked about that in the video I posted earlier. Yeah, as always, pretty big problem. But anyway, all I'm saying here is implement phase 2. One problem so as you can see, it will understand what needs to be done from the ClaudeMD. It knows exactly what files to read and what to look at, and it does that, and it proceeds forward. As you can see, it got to the point that it can run the backend and run it and then test what's happening. Okay, we have updated the backend, and now we are towards documentation. So now the changelog is going to be updated. And hopefully we will see it right here. Yep, we can see it right here. Perfect. What it's doing is basically testing the backend API with the access to the database, seeing that they can talk. That ends up being pretty cool, actually. As an approach, I think it has future. I was thinking of, and I know people have done that, and I haven't got to that yet, but like Claude is a wonderful agent, but there should be quite a lot of open source alternatives. I know two of them, Open Interpreter and I forgot the other one. But I tried them, and they're too far from what Claude can do at this point. So again, for the quality question, as you can see, it's better to use Claude. Well, if they keep running as fast, they will stay ahead, but we'll see. Okay. It's ready for phase 3. It updated the changelog, and as always, I'm gonna do clear, and we're gonna start the next phase. The other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the model back to Sonnet 4.5. I think the breadth of the useful context is more important right now than the power of the raw intelligence. So go on with phase 3. And the rest it will figure out by reading the right files in the right places. And hopefully, because it's Sonnet, it's going to go a little faster. There's one thing I noticed, that when I cleaned the session and started, it doesn't read the architecture document. It only read roadmap and changelog. And that's obviously not great. I think we need to instruct more clearly that it needs to read architecture, because otherwise it's not going to be in the context of what's happening. Make sure we instruct Claude to read architecture MD document, and if necessary, requirements and the MD documents when the new session is started, along with the changelog and the roadmap, of course. But we need to give it a better picture of what's going on in the project. Okay, in the meantime, it came to actually the changelog, so it indicated that it's kind of finished with the phase. We're approaching a point when we need to start testing that stuff, so that's coming soon. All right, we updated Claude MD. I think it's important to make sure that it reads it, not just knows that it exists. Okay, project index, hierarchy updated. I think this project index is quite important, actually. I'm not convinced that we need to necessarily keep it in JSON. We can keep it in YAML or something else, a little bit more human readable, but JSON is fine as well. Maybe I will redo it to YAML later. So the front end is in the next stage. So we need to get to phase 4 in order to, actually see something and play with something. So let's do that. Let's do clear. And I want to make sure that I save changes. Yes, so everything is saved. Now let's go on to the next phase. You know what? I don't see that it actually read the architecture document. So maybe it's not reloading Claude MD when I clear it. So let me exit this stuff and start it again. And now go on with phase 4. Let's see what happens now. Roadmap, change project index, architecture. Yeah, all good. So now it's reading all this info, and let's see. It's checking what's already implemented, even though it kind of should have gotten this information from project index, but that's okay. It wants to make sure. Now it got itself familiar, and we'll keep going with implementation and we will be able to test it. I wanted to show you what it just did. I just interrupted it in the middle of what it was doing because I saw that it went to create integrations that I don't really need right now. So I stopped it and just asked to keep the implementation of this integration to later and just put some mock implementation there. So I don't have to wait for all of that. I can change it on the fly, and that actually, doesn't affect me all that much. I can come back to that later and we will have exactly the same kind of logic there. Okay, so it went through some testing and created a Python test and run the test, and it says that everything is great. And now it updates the changelog. And I don't know if it's going to update anything else. Yeah, the project index. Good. Interesting. Let's take a look at the changelog and what is happening here. Well, interestingly, he's mentioning the dates, whereas I think it makes a lot more sense to mention time in every change because we're not waiting for days to make those changes. So I'm going to do that. Please instruct it to use date and time in the changelog entries in order to make sure that we capture second by second changes. All right. It's marking. That's so interesting. While Cursor is working on the agent is working on the project. So it's like agents building projects these days. And it's not a joke. That's just the way it is. Not exactly convenient. I need a wider screen, I think, because I don't want a different alignment. Anyway, good. That part is updated. Right, so it says that the backend server is running, and okay. So it wasn't frontend yet, it was a backend, and it built an entire API. The next thing it's gonna go to is building the actual frontend. So let's see. I mean, I think you get the point actually of this thing. I will just keep implementing the phases and hopefully get to the end and show you the end result, but you get the idea. Whatever happens there, the mutable parts of that are all hosted on your local folder in the Claude config, in the Postgres data, in the working directory with the project itself. And it is completely isolated in a separate image, and it is running and exposed from the container when you do that properly. Okay, so after a night working, well, actually, it's not a night working. I just left it for a night and it didn't work. And then I approved a couple of things in the process, but basically it finished building a bunch of things, and we can look at the roadmap and see that, let's actually see. I've completed most of the phases. I skipped a couple of phases because, yeah, for prototype, they were not necessary. But we got to building the front end. We got to building some, doing some integration testing. We haven't done like launching and monitoring, but I did launch it and we finally got the actual system working. So that's the basis of the system, obviously, but it does have the data on the back end, and meaning the database is fully up on the back end, and this is a complete system. Now we just need to make sure that, this is working as expected. But before I go there, I feel like I need to switch to more sort of incremental and day-to-day management, which means that I would probably need to change the artifacts that I have over here for Claude from the mode where we're kind of building towards an MVP to the mode where we can have, endless list of things that we want to add. And what it means is that in this case, it doesn't need to know all the changes that had happened in the development. It needs to know recent changes, and it needs to know a complete snapshot kind of picture about the project and what is happening there. So I think what I'm going to do here, and you don't have to do that this way, but it's just my way of approaching that. I'm gonna edit the changelog, and in this changelog, I'm going to make it so more detailed changelogs for the most recent changes and less detailed logs for the further changes. So basically the logic should be that we should keep the most recent logs detailed and then less detailed and then less detailed so that we can keep the overall length of the changelog to say 500 lines and manage the size. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to drop the changelog here and Claude MD. I can do that with Claude as well. I just feel like doing that this way. I'm controlling the context here. Okay, so as you can see, we have developed application quite a lot, and now we need to switch to the mode when we are not overblowing the changelog, and that LLMs going forward are receiving most relevant information in the limited size of the context. And so what I want you to do is two things. I want you to edit the changelog so that we had all the details about the most recent changes and updates, but the further they go, not in time, but in like numbers, the less detailed they should become. And the least detailed version should be just one line update with the date and time of the update and a short description of the update. Idea being that this changelog should always be kept at around, say, 500 lines or so. So update the changelog this way, and then go ahead and update Claude MD to keep the changelog updates in the same fashion going forward. Okay, get all the instructions over here. I'm gonna put opus. Let's make it happen. In the meantime, I'm gonna move these things, create docs folder. You know, what's interesting here is that really this environment with my Claude MD, my memory, my approaches within Claude MD, or your approaches within Claude MD is what makes the difference to how these agents are working and how they're made and how they're built. And this is what is creating value rather than LLMs on their own per se. So yeah, if you work through them and optimize and organize them even better every time, yeah, you're going to be in a good position. What I don't like overall about Claude being a little bit too verbose is that it is creating a ton of artifacts that I wouldn't create, like this how to log in MD. Like we did some changes with development login over here, and it just decided to create this summary, whereas really what I'm looking forward to do is to have everything outlined within memory with all the different artifacts of that. Yeah, I think I'm gonna drop this README as well. I don't need that. All right, let's take a look what we have over here. Okay, it left the top updates, and in the bottom updates, it shortened them. Okay, great. And then it's gonna go update Claude MD. So I'm thinking that I'm gonna keep the design requirements. We'll just need to validate it from time to time. Requirements-wise, I think I'm gonna change the requirements. I mean, if I look at it from the product management perspective, I'm thinking that maybe the optimal way to go with that would be to have user stories outlined in addition to the requirements, something like what we have in the roadmap, but again, with indications of what has been done. Yeah, I think I want to do with the roadmap something similar to what we did with the changelog, whereas it becomes like a backlog of things to accomplish that is rank ordered. And then we would have kind of a history of the features that have been implemented. And I also want to add the date and time of when it was implemented. And so this way we will have one record for the backlog, for the to-do list, what needs to be done. And it will be a living document that will be constantly updated. So first, let's look here. Recent project changes mentioned. Okay. And project change condensed to preserve context window space. That is just perfect. And now in this chat, it is already familiar with the Claude MD, so I'm going to do the same thing to the roadmap. Or not the same thing, but similar thing. I want you to change that and make it into a living document with the up-to-date roadmap that will have all the different features and user stories and functionalities that are implemented, rank ordered by importance and by priority, or basically the sequence in which product manager or user decided to order them. But for the agent, whatever is on top should be identified as a priority that they need to work upon. And that's on top of the file. It can be separated between specific epics and, say, user stories or functionalities or features. Just for simplicity, let's make it like an epic and a feature, not user story so far. And down in the file, we should have a list of completed features and user stories, as we have right now indicated what has been done. And going forward, I want you to add to the Claude MD so that agent indicated when a particular feature was marked as complete or even, yeah. I think that's enough. I was thinking about more details. All right. I think that's roughly what I'm looking for. Again, I'm putting Opus 4 on this one. I want to make another change. I want to change the architecture MD to represent the current state of the architecture rather than the target state of the application. So I would, in this case, I think I would go to Claude and ask it to review the architecture and represent the current view, because it will need to look at a bunch of files and infrastructure as well. I'm gonna do clear up the interface first of all. Okay, so I want you to take a look at the project and understand the project. And the objective that you have is to look at architecture document and then change it to represent the current state of the architecture. That includes the data models and that we have in the database. So that means that you need to review the current code and understand how that works architecturally. And if it's any different, then you need to make changes into architecture MD to reflect the reality. Basically, architecture MD was created as the target state of the architecture that we should arrive at when we complete the initial phases of implementation. Now, initial phases of implementation are complete, and we need to switch to the point of the ongoing support and development of this system. So this architecture MD needs to become this evergreen representation of the current architecture, and we will update it as the architecture updates. But right now, I want you to make sure that this is accurate. All right, I wonder if I can. No, I cannot switch the model already. I can put it on the plan mode, which will put it in Opus, which is a good thing. All right, in the meantime, we updated roadmap, made it a living document, changed it to epics. That's good. Completed features. Good. Yeah, that works. And let's go over here in the planning mode. So once I click it, I understand that it will start reading all the different files. It went and have done so. And now we'll analyze the project and update my architecture MD. Just want to see how it's going to be updating that. And as you can see, I'm pretty confident with these updates at the point of clean context. There is not too much data there to confuse the LLM. So I think it's going to do a good job. Well, I know it's going to do a good job in that regard, just because I have enough context available. Anyway, architecture development update plan. Review the current key different changes. Aha, there you go. That's a drift that happens when we develop it. The actual database becomes a little different from what we originally anticipated. Yep, that sounds good. We should start seeing these updates rolling in as it is making changes. The reason I'm not trusting this document that it is creating is because I know that I instructed Claude to keep this memory updated as it should. Like keep the roadmap updated, keep the changelog updated, and things like that. I didn't tell it to, keep other documentation updated, which means that it will not. And which means that these guys will go sour pretty quickly and will become unusable. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna drop them. We'll update the, oh wait, where's the, yes, all right, I wanna come back to the architecture and see the changes over here. And also what I'm definitely looking forward to is improving models even more, because the better they become and not having context rot, and the better they become and not in extending the window, the bigger projects I can trust this system to manage. That's as simple as that. Key features section. Okay, it keeps this in progress, not yet implemented kind of things, but they're architecturally and technology related, which is good. I don't think we should have feature plans over here, although it's technical features. Just don't want to have two things in the same place. It is updating change log. Saying that it updated the architecture documentation, which is valid. Honestly, I just wanted to keep updates, I guess, shorter. So right now it added, but it didn't remove anything. Okay, that's acceptable at this size of the file. Now I want you to update ClaudeMD a little bit to reflect the need to update architecture document when architecture is changing, and look at the architecture document as a snapshot of the current architecture that needs to be up to date as we are making these changes within the application. Also make sure to mention that we should only make necessary changes and not overblow the size of the document, as it will create difficulties with the context size. Yeah, so I have to explain some things to it, why I'm doing that. So at this point, ClaudeMD is actually growing to a very decent set of instructions. Yep, that's good. So what we have now is architecture that is reflecting reality, the change log that is condensable and focuses agent on the most recent things, design requirements that reflect UI, project index that reflects the hierarchy within project, requirements that reflect, well, actually, what am I going to do about requirements now? Because roadmap document we have updated, and now we have the roadmap on top of that. But I am not convinced what to do about requirements document now. I think requirements is like a high level living document representing the goal that we want to be achieving. So it's like a snapshot of reality that we want to achieve. And basically it needs to be the source. If we're changing the requirements, then we need to review and reprioritize the roadmap based on these requirements. So the entry point for changes, if it goes through requirements, then it needs to change the roadmap and then, the rest. And if we're changing the well, actually process-wise, it really does need to come from the changes in the high-level requirements and then kind of go down to the roadmap specifically. So I want to change the requirements this way. I think I'm going to do that in the same chat. We still have 35% only of the opus here, so we're fine to keep working with that. The requirements document was originally designed as the set of requirements for the MVP of the project. And now I want to change it so that I can enable the process of working with an agent in the following way. Requirements will be the always valid representation of the target state of the system from the product management perspective. So this is the high-level description of what is the system that we want to achieve. And when a user wants to make changes into the system, they would edit their requirements, and it should trickle down to the roadmap changes. And so I want you to do two things. First, change the requirements to represent the current understanding of the target reality, to make it a snapshot of the future state of the system, where we are going with this system. And it could be also in a position where it already represents the reality, which is fine, so which means we're not changing anything. However, then I want you to update Claude MD to reflect the workflow, where requirements is the entry point for the changes into the future state of the application. And the roadmap needs to be built and updated based on the requirements. So if user is asking to add something to the roadmap, agent needs to confirm that user is first happy to change the requirements document to reflect the future reality based on the request to change, and then trickle down the changes into the actual epics and features that are needed in order to implement this picture of reality. So again, two things. First of all, update the requirements, and second, update Claude MD to enable Claude to behave in this manner. Well, that was a lot of text, but I think it was actually useful context and helpful context. Let's see. So this is like requirements becomes a future document, and the roadmap becomes a plan how we get to the future, and the change log becomes the history of the past. So this is like the structure of the mind. And the project index is like hierarchy of the project. And well, design requirements is clear and architecture is clear. It's just the current representation of these aspects. But yeah, there's a way to look at that this way. Requirements is a future state towards which we're getting with the help of the roadmap. And the changelog is the past state to show us the history. All right, started to make some changes. It just indicates what has been implemented, what is planned, what is the vision. Convinced that that's how I want it. Although no, that's fine. That's fine actually. Define the workflow, requirements first, update requirements, cascade to the roadmap, makes sense, and then go to implementation. So I guess this is going to be the biggest challenge, to keep all of these guys synced up. And we will need to have some sort of routine to make sure that our requirements are synced up to the roadmap and architecture is synced up to the current architecture. We're probably going to create some sort of commands to do that going forward. Okay, so let's give it a try. I'm going to clear it again, just for the clean start. Okay, I want you to take a look at the documentation of the project and the roadmap, and let me know what we should be implementing next in this project. Okay, it's getting familiar with that stuff. Hibernating. I don't want you to hibernate. And I think I'm still in the planning mode, which is fine, actually. Okay, so it's thinking about the knowledge base management. I wouldn't actually go there. I want to deprioritize knowledge base management so far and focus on basic system functionality and get to that later. So this is what we're in a sort of this roadmap management kind of position right now. I want you to change the requirements and the roadmap in order to lower the priority of the knowledge base management. We will be implementing this later. What we need to focus upon now is to make sure that the current system is working as expected. So we should focus on probably testing this system. And I think number one thing that we need to do at the moment is to fill up the database for the test user with some sort of test data so we can see how system works with the data available within it. I want to see if it's going to follow my instructions with regards to updating the requirements. Yep, it is updating the requirements. And the roadmap. Interesting that it's putting a time of 6:30 here, which is not at all the time that I have right now, but whatever. Yep, I'll get to it later. Cross that out. I'll leave that one here. I am pretty sure that what I'm going to need to get to is creating sub-agents to manage particular parts of these applications, such as front-end, back-end, database, etc. Because the project is getting pretty big right now, and there's no surprise that the context is being overloaded. But I think you get the point now. I wanted to show you how this setup is working, where I have within one Docker image, I have this template of the project that can create a Docker image with this project within it, with the database, Claude config, and working directory of the application over here, and what kind of development flow it enables for me, and how to change this development flow in order to adjust it to your workflow of development to achieve the best results possible with agents similar to Claude or Claude itself. So yeah, I hope it was useful, and see you next time.